The stars were quiet around Earth's outer defense ring. They had been quiet for 37 years. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the massive battleship Titan's Wrath, watching the endless patrol route that her ships had followed for decades. The same route, the same silence, the same isolation. Earth was alone by choice. The rest of the galaxy called humans Deathworlders, and crossed to the other side of space lanes when human ships appeared. Sarah remembered the early days after first contact. The fear in alien eyes when they learned that humans came from a world where almost everything tried to kill them, where storms could level cities and animals hunted in packs, where the very air and water could be poison to most galactic species. The Galactic Council had been polite but firm. Humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to fight and die for causes that other species would simply abandon. The Council suggested that Earth might be happier keeping to itself. The suggestion came with a fleet of 12 different alien species surrounding the solar system. So Earth had agreed. Humans built the defense ring and stayed inside it. They sent no messages to the outside galaxy. They made no attempts to join galactic civilization. They simply existed, and the galaxy seemed happy to forget about them. Sarah's second-in-command, Captain James Morrison, walked up beside her. "Another day in paradise," he said with a tired smile. "The sensor drones report nothing new. No ships, no signals, no nothing." Sarah nodded. It was the same report they got every day. The galaxy beyond the defense ring lived its life without humans. War started and ended. Species rose and fell. Trade routes opened and closed. But none of it touched Earth or the 1,000 human colonies scattered throughout their isolated sector. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, "I'm getting something strange on the deep space array." Sarah and Morrison exchanged glances. Strange signals were rare. The defense ring's outer sensors were designed to detect anything approaching human space from light years away. Most of the time, they detected nothing but cosmic background radiation and the occasional merchant ship that quickly changed course when it realized where it was heading. "What kind of strange?" Sarah asked, walking over to the communications station. Torres frowned at her screens. "It's a distress signal, Admiral. But it's not using any human frequency, and it's encrypted, but somehow our computers are decoding it automatically." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "That's impossible. Our encryption systems aren't compatible with any alien technology." "We made sure of that after the isolation agreement." Sarah leaned over Torres's shoulder to look at the data. The signal was definitely alien in origin, but her computers were treating it like it belonged there. Like someone had specifically designed it to work with human systems. "Where's it coming from?" she asked. "The Helix Nebula," Torres replied. "That's deep in Council space. Whoever sent this had to have some serious transmission power to reach us across that distance." The bridge fell silent. The Helix Nebula was over 200 light-years away, well beyond the normal range of even military communication arrays. For a signal to reach them from that distance, it would need either massive power or some kind of relay system. "Play it," Sarah ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was clearly alien, with the musical tones that Sarah recognized as belonging to the Thari species. But there was something in that voice that needed no translation. Fear, desperation, the kind of terror that came from watching everything you cared about die. "This is researcher Veltar of the Thari Collective, transmitting on all frequencies. Our worlds are burning. The Void Swarm has returned, and they are consuming everything in their path. 17 systems have gone dark. Our fleets are destroyed. Our defenses are useless." The voice paused, and Sarah could hear explosions in the background. "I am sending this message to those who once called me friend. I know you have withdrawn from galactic affairs. I know the Council fears you, but we are dying, and you are the only ones who might be able to stop this. The Swarm adapts to everything we use against them. They learn from our tactics and counter them, but they have never faced Deathworlders. Please, if any part of you still cares about the galaxy beyond your borders, help us." The message cut off with the sound of alarms and the distinctive whine of energy weapons. Sarah stared at the communication panel. She knew that voice. Veltar had been one of the few alien researchers who had argued for peaceful relations with humanity during the first contact period. While other species called for quarantine or worse, Veltar had insisted that humans were just another sapient species trying to survive in a hostile universe. "Admiral?" Morrison's voice was carefully neutral. "Your orders?" Sarah closed her eyes. The Void Swarm was a nightmare from the galaxy's past, a species of parasitic organisms that consumed entire civilizations, learning and adapting with each conquest. They had appeared once before, nearly 1,000 years ago, and it had taken the combined might of 50 different species to drive them back into the dark space between galaxies. If they had returned, and if they had already consumed 17 systems, then the galaxy was facing extinction. "Get me a connection to Fleet Command on Earth," she said finally. "Emergency priority." Torres nodded and began working her controls. Within minutes, the holographic form of Admiral Rebecca Hayes, head of Earth's Space Defense Force, appeared on the bridge. Hayes was older than Sarah, with gray hair and the kind of scars that came from fighting in the early colonial wars. "Sarah," Hayes said without preamble, "I've been monitoring your communications." "The message from the Thari researcher? You heard it?" "Every ship in the defense ring heard it. The signal was powerful enough to reach every human station from here to the outer colonies." Hayes paused. "The question is what we do about it." Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew was watching her carefully. They were good people, all of them. Veterans who had signed up to protect human space from any threats. But they had been isolated for so long that most of them had never seen an alien in person. "Admiral, what's the current status of the main fleet?" Sarah asked. 247 capital ships, 800 frigates and destroyers, and approximately 2,000 support vessels, all fully crewed and maintained. "We never stop preparing for war, even in isolation," Morrison whispered under his breath. "The galaxy's going to wet itself when they see that much firepower moving." Hayes heard him. "Captain Morrison raises a good point. If we move the fleet beyond the defense ring, every species in the galaxy is going to assume we're launching an invasion. The panic alone could destabilize half the trade routes in Council space." Sarah nodded. It was a real concern. Humans had isolated themselves, but they had never stopped building ships or training crews. The galaxy remembered humanity as a minor species with a few dozen ships and aggressive tendencies. They had no idea that Earth now commanded a fleet larger than most galactic empires. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving through the Helix Nebula. Whatever the Void Swarm is using for ships, they're big, and there are a lot of them." Sarah made her decision. "Admiral, I'm recommending immediate fleet mobilization. Full combat deployment." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, once we cross that defense ring, there's no going back. The galaxy will know that the Deathworlders are active again. Some species will see us as saviors. Others will see us as a threat worse than the Void Swarm. Then we'll deal with that when the time comes," Sarah replied. "Right now there are people dying, and we have the power to help them." Hayes smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Fleet mobilization begins in 6 hours. You'll have operational command of the forward elements." The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving Sarah alone with her crew and the weight of the decision they had just made. "Well," Morrison said quietly, "I guess the vacation's over." Sarah looked out at the stars beyond the defense ring. Somewhere out there, an ancient enemy was consuming worlds, and the galaxy that had once feared humanity was about to learn why Deathworlders were called that name. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Prepare for combat operations. We're going hunting." The emergency council chamber on Galactic Station Prime buzzed with fear and arguments. Representatives from 43 species sat around the massive circular table, their translators working overtime to convert panic into dozens of different languages. The holographic display in the center showed the advancing darkness of the Void Swarm, system after system going silent as red markers spread across the galaxy map. Counselor Zenthera of the Altarian Republic stood at her podium, her blue skin pale with stress. 21 systems now," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. "The Kepler defense grid fell 6 hours ago. The Thari homeworld has less than 48 hours before the swarm arrives." The chamber erupted in frightened chittering, growling, and other sounds that the translators couldn't quite manage. High Counselor Mordak, an elderly Rigelian whose species had survived the last Void Swarm invasion 1,000 years ago, raised his hand for silence. "The situation is clear," Mordak said in his gravelly voice. "Our combined fleets cannot stop them. Every weapon we use, they adapt to within hours. Every tactic we employ, they counter within days. We are fighting an enemy that learns faster than we can innovate." Commander Zeftir of the Centauri Defense Forces, whose fleet had been the first to engage the swarm, stood slowly. His usually pristine uniform was stained and torn from his recent escape from the battle at Kepler Station. "High Counselor, with respect, you don't understand," Zephyr said, his voice hollow. "It's not just that they adapt. They're better than us. Faster, stronger, more coordinated. Their bioships regenerate damage in real time. They coordinate across light years without any communication delay we can detect. And they're hungry." "Hungry?" asked Representative Velnari from the Peaceful Trader Coalition. "They don't just kill," Zephyr continued. "They consume. Planets, ships, people. They break everything down to its component elements and incorporate it into their fleet. The more they consume, the stronger they become. Every victory we give them makes them harder to defeat." The chamber fell into a heavy silence. The holographic display updated again, showing another system going dark. "We need to consider all options," Zenthara said finally, "including options we would normally never consider." She didn't need to say the word. Everyone in the chamber knew what she meant. Humans. The Deathworlders. Counselor Thekvar of the Peaceful Alliance slammed his tentacle against his podium. "Absolutely not. Have you forgotten what those creatures are capable of? They come from a world where the very air is toxic to most life forms, where predators hunt in organized packs, where the weather systems can destroy entire continents. We remember the psychological evaluations," added Representative Cole Thani of the Science Collective. "They have an abnormal willingness to engage in self-destructive behavior for tactical advantage. They view violence as a first resort rather than a last one. They're barely civilized." High Counselor Mordak cleared his throat. "I was here during the first contact period," he said quietly. "I remember the fear when we realized what kind of world they came from. When we learned that they hunted their own planet's apex predators for sport. When we discovered that their idea of safety equipment would be considered military hardware by most species." "Exactly," Thekvar exclaimed. "They're dangerous, unstable. We isolated them for good reasons." "Yes," Mordak continued calmly, "but I also remember the war games." The chamber fell silent again. The war games were not something the council liked to discuss. They had been conducted in secret, 5 years after first contact, when some military advisors had wondered how human tactics would fare against conventional galactic forces. "Tell them," Zenthara said softly. Mordak sighed. The humans were given a simulation scenario, a defensive position with limited resources against overwhelming odds. Standard galactic military doctrine calls for surrender when facing odds greater than 3 to 1. He paused, looking around the chamber. The humans were facing 50 to 1 odds. They not only refused to surrender, they launched a counterattack. They used tactics that our computers labeled as strategically suicidal and tactically impossible. They won. "It was just a simulation," Kolthani protested weakly. "They won by taking casualties that would have broken any other species," Mordak continued. "They sacrificed entire units to achieve tactical objectives. They used their own ships as weapons. They fought until their last ship was destroyed and somehow still managed to complete their mission objectives." Commander Zephyr looked up from where he had been staring at his hands. "High Counselor, are you suggesting that we ask the humans for help?" "I'm suggesting that we're facing extinction," Mordak replied bluntly. "The Void Swarm has consumed 21 systems in 6 weeks. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within 3 months. Our fleets are broken. Our defenses are useless. Our tactics are ineffective." "But if we contact the humans," Thekvar said desperately, "if we break the isolation agreement, there's no guarantee they'll help us. For all we know, they'll see this as an opportunity to conquer the galaxy themselves." Zenithara activated her personal display, showing intelligence reports from the human isolation zone. "Our long-range sensors have been monitoring human space for 37 years. They've built the most powerful military force in known space. 247 capital ships, each one larger and more heavily armed than our dreadnoughts." Gasps echoed around the chamber. "They have the ships," she continued. "They have the weapons. They have the soldiers. And according to every psychological profile we have, they have the willingness to use them." Representative Velnari spoke up in a small voice. "But will they help us? We told them to stay away. We treated them like a plague species." "Why would they risk their lives for people who rejected them?" "Because," said a new voice from the chamber entrance, "that's what humans do." Everyone turned to see researcher Veltar walking slowly into the chamber. The Thari scientist looked exhausted, his normally bright feathers dull and singed. He had escaped from the Helix Nebula just hours before the swarm arrived. "Veltar," Xanthara said gently, "you should be in medical." "I sent them a message," Veltar said, ignoring her concern. "Before my world fell, I sent a distress call to human space. I used the personal encryption key that Admiral Chen gave me during the first contact period." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Contacting the humans without council approval was technically an act of treason. "You did what?" Thekvar shrieked. "I asked them for help," Veltar said simply. "And do you know what they said?" The chamber fell silent, waiting. They said yes. Their entire fleet is mobilizing as we speak. They're coming whether the council approves or not. High Counselor Mordak leaned forward. "How do you know this?" Veltar smiled weakly. "Because I've been monitoring human communications since I sent the message." "They're not arguing about whether to help. They're arguing about how many ships to send." Commander Zeftir stood up slowly. "How many ships are they sending?" "All of them," Veltar replied. "Every capital ship, every destroyer, every frigate. The largest military mobilization in galactic history. They're calling it Operation Starshield." The chamber was dead quiet as the implications sank in. The humans weren't sending a token force or a diplomatic mission. They were deploying their entire military to fight an enemy that had defeated every force the Council could field. "When will they arrive?" Xanthara asked. "The advance elements should reach the Helix Nebula within 72 hours, Veltar said. "Admiral Chen is leading them personally." Thekvar collapsed into his seat. "The galaxy is about to see what happens when Deathworlders go to war." High Counselor Mordak stood slowly, his old bones creaking. "Emergency session is now in recess. All representatives will return to their home governments and inform them that the human fleet is mobilizing. We will reconvene in 6 hours to discuss our response." As the representatives filed out of the chamber, talking in hushed, frightened voices, Veltar approached Xanthara. "Counselor," he said quietly, "there's something else you should know." "What is it?" "The humans aren't coming to save the Council. They're coming because people are dying, and they have the power to stop it. Admiral Chen made that very clear in her response to my message." Xanthara felt a chill run down her spine. "What exactly did she say?" Veltar looked out at the holographic display, where more systems were going dark by the hour. "She said, 'We're coming. Tell the galaxy to get out of our way.'" Outside the station, the first human ships were already crossing the isolation boundary, their massive forms cutting through space like sharks sensing blood in the water. The Deathworlders were awake and they were hunting. The first human ship to cross into Council space was the stealth frigate Shadow's Edge, commanded by Captain Yuki Tanaka. Unlike the massive battleships that would follow, the Shadow's Edge was built for reconnaissance and infiltration. Her hull was covered in adaptive camouflage that could mimic cosmic background radiation, and her crew had trained for decades in the art of invisible warfare. Captain Tanaka sat in her darkened command center, watching the tactical display as her ship slipped through the outer regions of the Helix Nebula. The Void Swarm had been busy. Where there should have been the gentle glow of inhabited worlds, there was only darkness. Entire solar systems had been stripped clean, their matter consumed and converted into the swarm's bioships. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Singh from the sensor station. "I'm reading movement ahead. Multiple contacts, heading toward the Thari home system." Tanaka leaned forward. "How many?" "I count 47 large bioships, each one approximately the size of a Council dreadnought." "But Captain," Singh paused. "They're not metal. The sensors are reading them as organic, living tissue." "Confirmed," added Ensign Rodriguez from the science station. "These things are alive. They're showing cellular activity, blood flow patterns, neural networks. They're not ships with crews. They are the crew." Tanaka felt a cold smile cross her face. The Council had been fighting these things like they were normal spacecraft. No wonder they were losing. You couldn't defeat a living enemy with conventional weapons designed for metal and electronics. "Singh, get me a full spectrum analysis of their biosignatures. Rodriguez, start recording everything. The main fleet is going to want detailed intelligence when they arrive." "Aye, Captain," both officers replied. The Shadow's Edge drifted closer to the swarm formation, her stealth systems keeping her invisible to their sensors. Tanaka watched in fascination as the bioships moved. They didn't fly in formation like normal spacecraft. They moved like a pack of hunting animals, flowing around each other in complex patterns that seemed almost choreographed. "Captain," Singh said urgently, "I'm reading energy buildup in the lead bioship. It looks like they're preparing to feed." On the main screen, a holographic display showed the Thari home system. The planet still glowed with the lights of cities, still showed the energy signatures of a living civilization. But Tanaka could see that the planet's orbital defenses had been destroyed. Debris from shattered space stations created a ring of metal around the world. The lead bioship extended what looked like feeding tentacles toward the planet. Each tentacle was kilometers long and covered in what appeared to be harvesting equipment. As Tanaka watched in horror, the tentacles began to strip away the planet's atmosphere, sucking it up into storage organs within the bioship. "Dear God," Rodriguez whispered. "They're eating the planet alive." Tanaka activated her communication system. "This is Shadow's Edge to Admiral Chen. Priority Alpha transmission." The holographic form of Admiral Chen appeared on the command deck, her face grim. Behind her, Tanaka could see the bridge of the massive battleship Titan's Wrath. "Report, Captain Tanaka." "Admiral, the swarm has reached the Thari homeworld. I count 47 large bioships beginning planetary consumption. The orbital defenses have been destroyed, and the planet has no significant protection." Chen's jaw tightened. "Estimated time until the planet is completely consumed." Tanaka glanced at her science officer, who ran quick calculations. "At current consumption rate, approximately 14 hours until the atmosphere is gone. 26 hours until the surface is stripped clean." "Understood. Captain, I want you to maintain observation and provide targeting data. The main fleet will be there in 6 hours." "Admiral," Tanaka said carefully, "these bioships are not like anything in our tactical database. They're living creatures, not mechanical constructs. Our weapons may have different effects than expected." Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Captain, we've been hunting living predators on Earth for thousands of years. I think we can figure out how to kill 47 overgrown space parasites." The transmission ended, leaving Tanaka alone with her crew and the horrifying sight of a planet being devoured before her eyes. 6 hours later, the main human fleet arrived in the Helix Nebula like an avenging storm. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Titan's Wrath, watching as her massive battleship led 246 other capital ships into the system. Behind them came 800 frigates and destroyers, their hulls bristling with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. "Admiral," reported Captain Morrison from the tactical station, "all ships report ready for combat. Captain Rodriguez's boarding teams are standing by, and the heavy assault groups are in position." Chen nodded. Captain Marcus Rodriguez commanded the dreadnought Perseverance, which carried the largest contingent of human marines in the fleet. His ship was designed for close-quarters combat and boarding operations, tactics that most galactic species considered barbarically outdated. "Signal from the swarm bioships," reported Lieutenant Torres. Well, it's not exactly a communication. It's more like a challenge roar. Put it on speakers." The sound that filled the bridge was unlike anything Chen had ever heard. It was part scream, part song, and part threatening growl. It spoke directly to the primitive parts of the human brain that remembered what it was like to be prey. "Well," Morrison said dryly, "I think they noticed us." Chen watched as the bioships began to turn away from the Thari homeworld. They moved with frightening speed and coordination, flowing toward the human fleet like a living tide of destruction. "All ships," Chen broadcast on the fleet channel. "Weapons free. Target the largest bioships first. Remember, these things are alive. Aim for what looks like vital organs." The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space. Human plasma cannons and railguns opened up at maximum range, sending streams of superheated metal and energy toward the approaching bioships. At the same time, the swarm creatures responded with weapons that seemed to be part of their own bodies. Streams of acid that could eat through hull plating. Electromagnetic pulses generated by specialized organs. Projectiles that appeared to be living creatures designed to burrow into enemy ships and attack from within. "Direct hit on bioship Alpha 7, reported Morrison. Plasma cannon penetrated what appears to be a major organ cluster. The target is showing significant damage. Good, Chen replied. But watch the others. See how they're reacting? Morrison studied his tactical display. The other bioships were indeed reacting to the damage to their companion, but they weren't adapting their defenses or changing their tactics. They were getting angry. Admiral, the swarm formation is breaking apart. They're charging us directly. Chen smiled. This was exactly what she had hoped for. The Void Swarm was used to fighting opponents who tried to maintain formation and use coordinated tactics. But humans had learned their combat skills hunting pack predators on Earth. They knew how to deal with angry enemies who abandoned strategy in favor of rage. All ships execute Maneuver Delta 7, break formation and engage individually. Show these things what happens when they try to fight a pack of wolves. The human fleet scattered like startled birds, each ship choosing its own target and angle of attack. To an outside observer, it would have looked like chaos. But there was a method to the apparent madness. Each human captain had trained for decades in this kind of free-form combat, and they trusted their fellow officers to cover their flanks while they focused on their chosen enemies. Captain Rodriguez brought the Perseverance in close to a massive bioship that was trying to ram his vessel. At the last moment, he fired his maneuvering thrusters and rolled his ship sideways, bringing his main guns to bear on what his sensors indicated was the creature's primary brain cluster. Fire, he commanded. The dreadnought's heavy railguns spoke as one, sending metal slugs the size of shuttlecraft through the bioship's neural centers at significant fractions of light speed. The creature convulsed and died in seconds, its massive form going limp and beginning to drift. Confirmed kill on target Beta 3, Rodriguez reported. These things don't like it when you scramble their brains. Around the battle zone, similar scenes played out as human captains used their ships like the weapons they were designed to be. Captain Lisa Park of the destroyer Lightning Strike used her ship's superior speed to dart in and out of a bioship's defensive range, targeting what appeared to be sensory organs. Commander Sarah Kim of the frigate Razor's Edge coordinated with 2 other frigates to perform a synchronized attack on a bioship's propulsion system, but the swarm was adapting. Chen watched as the surviving bioships began to change their tactics. Instead of charging blindly, they started to coordinate their attacks, trying to surround and overwhelm individual human vessels. Admiral, Morrison called out, "Bioships Alpha 1 through Alpha 5 are converging on Captain Thompson's position. The Valiant is taking heavy damage." Chen could see the situation on her tactical display. The heavy cruiser Valiant was surrounded by 5 of the largest bioships, each one attacking with acid streams and living projectiles. Captain Thompson was fighting back, but his ship was outnumbered and taking damage faster than his systems could repair it. "Signal Captain Rodriguez," Chen ordered. "Tell him it's time for a boarding action." Morrison stared at her. Admiral, the Void Swarm had survived for millions of years by being the perfect predator. They consumed civilizations, learned from each victory, and adapted to every threat. No species had ever presented them with a challenge they couldn't overcome through evolution and adaptation, until they met humans. 3 days after the first battle in the Helix Nebula, the swarm's collective consciousness was experiencing something it had never felt before: confusion. The creatures that called themselves humans fought in ways that defied all logic and survival instinct. In the bioship clusters scattered throughout the nebula, the swarm analyzed the data from their encounters with the human fleet. The analysis troubled them. Humans used tactics that should have resulted in their own destruction, yet somehow these tactics worked. They sacrificed their own vessels to achieve strategic objectives. They deliberately put themselves in danger to rescue damaged ships. They fought with a ferocity that increased rather than decreased as their losses mounted. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy it. Admiral Chen stood in the war room aboard the Titan's Wrath, studying the holographic display that showed the current positions of both fleets. The swarm had retreated deeper into the nebula after losing 30% of their bioships in the first engagement. But they weren't running. They were adapting. Intelligence reports from the scout ships indicate that the remaining bioships are undergoing some kind of biological modification, reported Captain Morrison. They're growing new armor plating, developing new weapon systems, and changing their internal structures to make boarding actions more difficult. Chen nodded. She had expected this. The Void Swarm's ability to adapt was legendary. But she was counting on something that the swarm didn't understand about humans. They adapted too, and they did it faster. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, turning to the Marine commander who had joined the briefing via hologram. "How are your boarding teams adjusting to the new bioship configurations?" Rodriguez grinned, his scarred face showing the kind of expression that made alien diplomats nervous. "Admiral, my Marines are having the time of their lives. These creatures keep changing their internal layouts, but they're thinking like prey animals. They're trying to make it harder for us to get in, instead of making it harder for us to survive once we're inside." "Explain." "Well, they've grown thicker hull plating and added more defensive organisms to their corridors, but they haven't figured out that humans don't mind fighting in tight spaces. Hell, some of my people prefer it. Sergeant Chen, no relation, Admiral, actually requested assignment to the most confined sections because she says it reminds her of cave fighting back on Earth." Chen smiled. Humans had evolved in environments where tight spaces meant safety, where the ability to fight in confined areas was a survival skill. The swarm was trying to make their bioships more like the cave systems and underground tunnels where humans had learned to hunt. "What about their new acid defense systems?" "That's actually made things easier," Rodriguez replied. "They're using the acid like a static defense, flooding corridors to stop intruders. But they don't seem to understand that humans have been dealing with environmental hazards for millennia. My teams just switch to acid-resistant gear and keep moving. Meanwhile, the bioships are poisoning their own internal organs with their defensive measures. And the living weapon projectiles they've been firing at our ships?" Captain Park of the destroyer Lightning Strike spoke up from her position at the tactical station. "Those are actually working in our favor, Admiral. The creatures they're launching at us are designed to burrow into ship hulls and attack the crew. But they're basically sending boarding parties to our ships, and our Marines are better at close-quarters combat than their organisms are." Chen looked around the room at her officers. They were tired, having been in combat for 3 straight days, but their morale was high. The kind of high that came from fighting an enemy that challenged them without overwhelming them. "Status report on the Thari evacuation?" "Evacuation is 60% complete," reported Lieutenant Torres. "The swarm's retreat gave us enough time to get most of the civilian population off-world. The remaining settlements are in hardened shelters that should hold out for another 48 hours. Chen nodded. The evacuation had been a tactical masterpiece. While the main human fleet engaged the swarm, smaller ships had landed on the Thari homeworld and began moving the population to safety. It was exactly the kind of operation that required coordination between multiple unit types, something that the swarm apparently couldn't comprehend. "Admiral," Morrison said, studying his tactical display, "we're receiving reports from our deep space reconnaissance drones. The swarm is calling for reinforcements." The holographic display zoomed out to show the broader region around the Helix Nebula. Red indicators showed massive bioship formations moving through dark space, heading toward their position. "How many?" Chen asked. "Approximately 400 additional bioships organized into 3 separate fleets. They'll arrive within 36 hours. The room fell silent. The human fleet had already taken losses fighting 47 bioships. 400 more would outnumber them by nearly 2 to 1, even with reinforcements. "Admiral," Rodriguez said quietly, "my Marines can handle boarding actions against individual bioships. But if we're facing those numbers, we're going to need a different approach." Chen stared at the display for a long moment. 400 bioships, each one the size of a dreadnought, each one carrying weapons that could destroy planets. The largest space battle in galactic history was about to begin, and humanity was going to be outnumbered by creatures that had never lost a war. "Captain Morrison," she said finally, "signal Fleet Command on Earth. Tell them to execute Protocol 7. Morrison's eyes widened. Protocol 7 was humanity's most extreme contingency plan. It had never been used in actual combat. "Admiral, are you sure? Protocol 7 has never been tested against living targets. It's never been tested against anything," Chen replied grimly. "But we're about to find out if Deathworld tactics work on a galactic scale." She turned to address the entire fleet on the general communication channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In 36 hours, we're going to face the largest enemy force that humanity has ever encountered. The Void Swarm is bringing everything they have to destroy us and finish consuming this region of space." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. "The rest of the galaxy expects us to lose. They think that we're brave but ultimately doomed. They're wrong. We're not brave. We're from Earth. We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us, and we not only survived, we became the apex predators. On ships throughout the fleet, human crews listened to their admiral's words and felt something stirring in their chests. It was the same feeling their ancestors had felt when facing down saber-toothed tigers and dire wolves. The feeling of being outnumbered by dangerous enemies and deciding to attack anyway. The Void Swarm thinks they understand us now. They think they've adapted to our tactics. They're about to learn why humans are called Deathworlders. We don't just fight to survive, and we fight to win. And when we can't win by being better, we win by being worse. Chen activated the fleet's tactical display, showing the approaching swarm reinforcements. In 6 hours, we're going to begin Operation Razor Wire. Every ship, every crew, every Marine is going to do something that the swarm has never seen before. We're going to turn their own numbers against them. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had terrified alien diplomats for decades. We're going to show them what happens when predators become prey. Across the fleet, human crews began preparing for the most desperate battle of their lives. In the engineering sections, technicians made final adjustments to weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of physics. In the Marine bays, soldiers checked equipment designed for environments that would kill most galactic species. In the medical bays, doctors prepared for casualty rates that would horrify the civilized galaxy. But in the command centers, human officers planned with the cold calculation of apex predators preparing for a hunt. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had never been defeated. They had never been happier. 6 hours later, the first phase of Operation Razor Wire began. Captain Tanaka's stealth frigate Shadow's Edge had been modified with new equipment that had never been tested in combat. Instead of trying to remain hidden, she was now broadcasting a signal that mimicked the bioship's own communication frequencies. "Signal is active. Captain," reported Lieutenant Singh. "The swarm reinforcement fleets are responding to our transmission." "Good," Tanaka replied. "Are they taking the bait?" "Confirmed. All 3 reinforcement fleets are changing course to intercept us. They think we're a damaged bioship calling for help." Tanaka smiled. The swarm's collective intelligence was sophisticated, but it was still based on instincts developed over millions of years of pack hunting, and pack hunters always responded to distress calls from their own kind. "Estimated time until intercept?" 18 hours, Captain." "Perfect. Signal the fleet. Phase 1 is successful. The enemy is exactly where we want them. Behind her, hidden in the Nebu." The final battle began at 0347 Standard Galactic Time, when the first Void Swarm reinforcement fleet entered the Helix Nebula's outer boundary. 400 bioships moved in perfect formation, their massive forms cutting through space like living weapons of mass destruction. They were walking into the most elaborate trap that humanity had ever constructed. Admiral Chen watched from the bridge of the Titan's wrath as her carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. For the past 18 hours, her fleet had been preparing the nebula itself as a weapon. Human engineers had deployed thousands of automated mines throughout the region, each one equipped with sensors that could distinguish between organic and mechanical targets. "First enemy fleet is entering the minefield," reported Captain Morrison. "Estimated contact in 3 minutes." Chen nodded. The mines weren't designed to destroy the bioships outright. They were designed to do something much worse. They were designed to confuse them. When the first mine detonated, it released a cloud of synthetic pheromones that mimicked the chemical signals the swarm used for communication. Within seconds, the leading bioships began receiving conflicting orders from the artificial signals. Some turned left, others turned right, and several actually began attacking each other as their collective intelligence tried to sort out the chaos. "Phase 1 successful," Chen announced to the fleet. "Enemy formation is breaking apart. All ships execute Phase 2. Across the nebula, human ships that had been hiding in the interference shadows suddenly activated their engines and weapons. But instead of engaging the confused bioships directly, they began herding them like sheep. Captain Rodriguez aboard the Perseverance led his squadron in a flanking maneuver that forced a group of 20 bioships toward a dense asteroid field that human engineers had spent the last day preparing. As the bioships entered the field, hidden explosive charges detonated, creating a cascade of rock and ice that trapped the creatures in a maze of debris. "Target-rich environment," Rodriguez reported with satisfaction. "Beginning boarding operations." His Marines launched themselves into the asteroid field, using the rocky debris as cover while they fought their way onto the trapped bioships. But this time, they weren't fighting to capture the vessels. They were fighting to plant something much more dangerous. "Admiral," Morrison called out, "Captain Rodriguez reports successful placement of the neural disruptors. First target is ready for Phase 3. Chen smiled grimly. The neural disruptors were perhaps the most cruel weapon that humanity had ever developed. They didn't destroy the bioships. They turned them against their own kind. Execute Phase 3. The neural disruptor activated, sending electromagnetic pulses directly into the trapped bioship's brain centers. Within minutes, the creature's own nervous system turned against it. But instead of dying, it began broadcasting attack pheromones that identified every other bioship in the area as an enemy. The result was spectacular and horrifying. The converted bioship turned on its companions with a fury that only a living creature could possess. It attacked with weapons that it knew intimately, using tactics that its targets couldn't predict because they came from their own tactical database. "Confirmed," reported Captain Park from the lightning strike. "The converted bioship has destroyed 3 of its former allies and is engaging a 4th. The enemy is literally fighting itself." But the Void Swarm's collective intelligence was beginning to adapt to the chaos. The remaining bioships started to recognize the artificial pheromone signals and began ignoring them. They regrouped and started pressing toward the Thari homeworld, accepting heavy losses in exchange for maintaining their objective. "Admiral," Morrison said urgently, "the 2nd and 3rd enemy fleets have entered the nebula. They're avoiding the areas where we deployed countermeasures. Total enemy count is now 620 bioships." Chen felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Even with their successful tactics, the human fleet was still massively outnumbered. They had destroyed or converted about 60 enemy bioships, but that still left more than 500, and the human fleet had taken losses of their own. "Status report on our forces. We've lost 12 capital ships and 37 smaller vessels. Admiral, at current casualty rates, we'll be overwhelmed within 6 hours. Chen looked around her bridge. Her crew was exhausted, having been in continuous combat for nearly 24 hours. But there was no fear in their eyes. If anything, they looked eager to continue the fight. "Signal all ships," she said. "Execute Protocol 7 final phase." Morrison stared at her. "Admiral, that's—" "I know what it is, Captain. Protocol 7 final phase was humanity's ultimate contingency plan. It had been developed by military theorists who had studied every major extinction event in Earth's history. It was based on a simple principle. When faced with a threat that could destroy everything you cared about, the only rational response was to make sure that threat could never threaten anyone else. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. We are implementing Scorched Earth protocols. Repeat, Scorched Earth protocols are now in effect." Across the fleet, human crews began implementing procedures that would have horrified the civilized galaxy. Ships that were too damaged to continue fighting were converted into massive bombs. Crews evacuated to other vessels, leaving behind only volunteer skeleton crews who guided their ships on collision courses with the largest enemy bioships. The cruiser Defiant, her hull cracked and her weapon systems failing, accelerated directly toward a cluster of 20 bioships. Her captain, Commander Sarah Blake, stayed at her post as her crew evacuated. "This is Commander Blake to all ships," she broadcast as her vessel approached the enemy formation. "Tell my family I died doing something worthwhile." The Defiant's reactor went critical just as she reached the center of the bioship cluster. The explosion was visible from halfway across the nebula, and when the light faded, all 20 enemy vessels were gone. But the most devastating human tactic was yet to come. Captain Tanaka's Shadow's Edge had been fitted with a weapon that existed only in theoretical physics papers. A quantum entanglement bomb. The device was designed to create a cascade reaction in any organic material within a light-year radius. It would turn the bioship's own living tissue against them. "Captain," Lieutenant Singh reported, "the weapon is armed and ready. But Captain, once we activate this, there's no turning back. The blast radius will include our own position." Tanaka looked around her bridge at the crew that had served with her for 5 years. They were young, all of them. Too young to die in a nebula light years from home. But they were also human, which meant they understood what duty meant. "Do we have volunteers for the skeleton crew?" she asked. Every hand on the bridge went up. Tanaka felt tears in her eyes. "I'm proud to serve with all of you. Activate the device." The quantum entanglement bomb detonated at the exact center of the Void Swarm fleet. The explosion was invisible to normal sensors, but its effect was immediate and devastating. Every bioship within the blast radius began to dissolve at the molecular level as their own organic compounds turned against them. 300 bioships died in less than 30 seconds. The remaining swarm forces, faced with destruction on a scale they had never imagined, finally did something they had never done in millions of years of existence. They ran. Admiral Chen watched on her tactical display as the surviving bioships fled toward dark space, their formation broken and their collective will shattered. For the first time in their species' history, the Void Swarm had encountered something more dangerous than themselves. "Admiral," Torres called out, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Every major government, every military force, every civilian authority. They're all asking the same question, which is, they want to know if we're coming for them next." Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. The galaxy had spent 37 years fearing humanity, and now they had just demonstrated exactly why that fear was justified. "Signal all human ships," she ordered. "We're returning to the Thari homeworld to complete the evacuation. After that, we're going home." "Admiral," Morrison said quietly, "we've lost 40% of the fleet. The casualties, I know, Captain, but we won. The swarm is broken, the Thari are safe, and the galaxy is going to remember this day for 1,000 years. 3 days later, Admiral Chen stood in the emergency session of the Galactic Council. The chamber was packed with representatives from every major species, and the air was thick with fear and nervous energy. High Counselor Mordak cleared his throat. "Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you for your actions in the Helix Nebula. The Thari species owes its survival to humanity's intervention." Chen nodded politely. "High Counselor, we did what we felt was necessary." "Yes," Mordak continued carefully, "and we are grateful. However, the Council feels that it is important to discuss the methods that your fleet employed against the Void Swarm." "You mean the quantum entanglement weapon?" The chamber fell silent. No one wanted to be the first to mention the weapon that had turned 300 living bioships into molecular soup. "Among other things," Mordak said carefully, "the Council is concerned about the implications of such weapons being in the hands of any single species.